My name is Walt Pruitt. I'm 53 years old. I live in a small house outside Council Bluffs, Iowa, that my wife Dottie and I bought 11 years ago, back when the kids were still young enough to fight over who got the bigger bedroom. They're grown now. My daughter teaches middle school in Cedar Rapids. My son is in the Coast Guard, stationed somewhere on the Gulf Coast that he can never quite describe to me over a bad phone connection. Dottie keeps the house and substitute teaches, and waits up later than she should when I'm on a long run. I've been driving long haul for 19 years. Before that, I worked the line at a meatpacking plant for 6 years. And before that, I did 2 tours in the Army, which is where I first learned what it feels like to be very far from home and entirely fine with it. I drive for a regional carrier now, mostly Midwest routes, Omaha to Denver, Denver to Cheyenne, occasionally a longer haul out to Salt Lake when someone needs the hours. I've put just under 2 million miles on highways across 14 states. I know I-80 through Nebraska the way some men know a hymn they grew up singing. Not because I memorized it, but because it's been repeated into me so many times, it lives somewhere below conscious thought. I am not an unhappy man. I want to say that clearly before I tell you what happened, because this is not a story about resentment. It's a story about a sentence I overheard once, and what I did with it, and what I learned about a woman who said it. The sentence happened at my niece Rachel's wedding, this past spring, in a banquet hall outside Lincoln. I don't go to many weddings. I go to family weddings, and Rachel is my sister's daughter, so I put on the one suit I own, and Dottie wore the blue dress she likes, and we drove down for the day. The reception was the kind with a cash bar, and a DJ who took requests too literally. I was standing near the edge of the room, getting a club soda, when I heard 2 women talking near the gift table. One of them was Rachel's new mother-in-law, a woman named Patricia Holloway, whom I had been introduced to earlier that day with the kind of brisk, assessing handshake that tells you everything about a person's priorities in under 3 seconds. She was talking to another woman, someone from her side of the family I never got introduced to, about a cousin's daughter who had recently started dating someone. "He drives a truck," Patricia said, in the particular tone people use when a sentence is doing more work than its words admit to. I can't imagine that at our table. I really can't. It's not anything personal. It's just not the kind of life we're used to. The other woman made a sound of polite agreement. Patricia kept going. Something about different worlds and not wanting to seem unkind, but honestly. And I stood there with my club soda and felt the specific, quiet sting of being insulted by someone who has no idea you're in the room. I didn't say anything. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't because I lacked the words. It was because Rachel had just gotten married, and the day belonged to her. And I have learned over 19 years on the road that some moments are not worth detonating for the sake of being right. I finished my club soda. I found Dottie. We left a little earlier than we'd planned, and on the drive home, I told her what I'd heard. And she reached over and put her hand on my knee and didn't say anything for a few miles, which is the kind of comfort that doesn't need explaining. I thought about Patricia Holloway exactly as much as a person thinks about a stranger's careless comment. Which is to say, I thought about her for a few days. And then I didn't, because life on the road doesn't leave a lot of room for carrying other people's small cruelties very far. 6 months passed. Summer turned into fall. I was on a Tuesday night run from Omaha to Cheyenne, hauling refrigerated freight that had to make a delivery window early Wednesday morning, which meant driving through the night on Highway 30 west of North Platte, the old Lincoln Highway route that runs roughly parallel to I-80, but slower, quieter. The kind of road you take when the interstate's backed up with construction, or when the dispatcher routes you that way for reasons that don't always make sense until later. It was just past 2 in the morning. Fog had settled into the low parts of the highway, the way it does in that stretch of Nebraska in October, thick enough that my high beams just bounced light back at me. So I dropped to low beams and slowed down to something reasonable. I had the radio off. I do that sometimes in fog. Turn off everything except the sound of the engine and the road, because I trust my ears more than I trust a song to tell me something's wrong up ahead. I saw the hazards before I saw the car. Weak amber pulses through the fog, maybe a quarter mile out, pulled half onto the shoulder at an angle that told me whoever was driving had been losing control of the situation before they stopped. I slowed the truck and pulled in well behind the vehicle, the way I always do, leaving room and putting my own hazards on, because a stopped truck on a foggy highway at 2 in the morning is its own hazard if you don't manage it right. I grabbed my flashlight and my jacket and climbed down. The car was a dark sedan, expensive in the understated way that expensive things sometimes are. The hood was up. A woman stood beside it, arms wrapped around herself, wearing a coat that wasn't built for standing outside in October fog, looking at her phone with the particular frustration of someone who has just confirmed there's no signal. She heard my boots on the gravel and turned fast, startled, and in the wash of my flashlight and the truck's running lights, I recognized her face before she recognized mine. It was Patricia Holloway. I want to be honest about the half-second that happened in my chest when I realized that. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was something more complicated. Recognition, mostly. And a kind of weary clarity, like watching a sentence you'd filed away suddenly become relevant again. "Oh, thank God," she said, and her voice had none of the polish it had carried at the wedding. It was just relief, raw and immediate. "I've been stuck out here for almost 40 minutes. My phone won't get a signal and the car it made a noise and the lights on the dash all came on at once and then it just died." "Pop the hood release again for me," I said. "Let me take a look." She didn't recognize me. I understood why. I'd been one suit among many at a wedding reception 6 months earlier, a man she'd been briefly introduced to and then never thought about again. I was, to her, exactly the kind of person she'd described at the gift table. Present in the room, but not really seen. I checked the engine with my flashlight. It took about 4 minutes to find it. A serpentine belt that had shredded itself, probably from a pulley that had been failing for a while. The kind of thing that gives you warning signs for weeks before it actually lets go. Without that belt, the alternator stops charging, the battery drains, and eventually everything in the car just quits at once. Exactly the way she'd described. "Your serpentine belt failed," I told her. "Once that goes, you lose your alternator, and the battery only lasts so long before everything shuts down. This isn't something I can fix on the shoulder. You're going to need a tow." She looked at the engine, then at me, with an expression I recognized from a different context. The specific look of someone trying to locate themselves in an unfamiliar situation. "I don't have a signal out here. I tried calling roadside assistance 20 minutes ago and it just dropped." "I get a weak signal sometimes with my truck system," I said. "Let me try." I climbed back up into the cab and used my CB and my phone together, the way you learn to in places where cell coverage is patchy, calling a dispatcher I knew in North Platte who could relay to a tow company. The kind of small network favor system that exists among people who spend their lives on roads that don't always cooperate with modern technology. It took about 10 minutes, but I got a tow truck dispatched out of North Platte, roughly 30 minutes out. When I climbed back down to tell her, she was standing closer to my truck than to her own car. Arms still wrapped around herself, looking smaller than the woman I remembered from the banquet hall. 30 minutes, I said. "You're welcome to wait in my cab if you want to get out of the cold. I've got the heater and there's coffee in the thermos. Though I'll warn you it's been sitting a while." She hesitated for a moment. The particular hesitation of someone weighing an old instinct against present circumstances. And then she said, "Thank you." I would. I helped her up into the cab, which is a higher step than most people expect, and she settled into the passenger seat looking at the dashboard. The CB, the small collection of things truckers keep in their cabs that tell you something about who they are. A photo of Dottie and the kids clipped to the visor. A worn paperback Western on the dash. A rosary that had belonged to my mother hanging from the mirror. Not because I'm especially devout, but because it was hers and I wanted it close. "This is a lot more comfortable than I expected," she said, which is a sentence I've heard more than a few times in 19 years, usually from people who had a very specific picture of what a truck cab would be before they were ever actually inside one. I poured her coffee. She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "I don't think I caught your name back there." "Walt," I said. "Walt Pruitt." She told me hers, like it was new information, like we hadn't been in the same room 6 months earlier. I didn't correct that. I wasn't trying to set a trap. I was just watching to see who she was when she didn't know she was being placed in a category. We sat there for a while, the heater running, fog pressing against the windshield, waiting for headlights that weren't there yet. She asked what I hauled. I told her. Refrigerated freight, mostly produce and dairy products, sometimes pharmaceuticals that needed tighter temperature control. She asked how long I'd been driving. 19 years, I told her. She asked if I missed home. Every single trip, I said. That doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it differently. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the fog. My husband travels for work too. Not like this. Flights, conferences. But he's gone a lot. I used to think that made us similar in a way. People who wait. It's a particular kind of tired, I agreed. The waiting. She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer. Sure. Do people ever... She paused, searching for the shape of the question. Do people ever look at what you do and decide things about you before they know anything else? I looked at her for a moment. The fog outside hadn't lifted. The road was empty in both directions. The particular emptiness of a highway at 2:30 in the morning in the middle of Nebraska, when it feels like the whole world has narrowed down to the inside of one warm cab and the question someone just asked you. All the time, I said. Most people don't mean anything cruel by it. They just see the job and stop looking. She nodded slowly, and there was something in her face that told me she was turning a memory over, examining an edge of it she hadn't expected to find sharp. I said something once, she said quietly, at a wedding, about someone who drives a truck. I don't even remember exactly what I said, but I remember the feeling behind it. And I've thought about it more than once since then, in a way that surprised me, because I don't usually think twice about things I say at parties. I didn't say anything. The heater hummed. The fog moved slowly across the windshield in long gray ribbons. I think, she said, I was scared of something, and I dressed it up as a preference. My father drove a delivery route for 30 years. Bread trucks. I grew up watching him come home exhausted, smelling like diesel, and I swore I'd build a life that looked nothing like his. And somewhere along the way, that turned into looking down on the thing he actually was, which was steady and reliable, and the reason I never went without anything as a kid. The tow truck's headlights appeared in the fog behind us, distant but growing. The particular yellow wash of a flatbed's running lights. I was at that wedding, I said. She turned to look at me fully for the first time since getting in the cab. Rachel's wedding, I said. I'm her uncle. I was standing near the gift table when you said it. The color left her face slowly, the way it does when someone is doing rapid arithmetic with information that doesn't want to add up cleanly. I drive a truck, I said, not unkindly. 19 years. She didn't say anything for a long moment. The tow truck's lights swept across the fog, closer now. I am so sorry, she said, and her voice had dropped any polish it had left. There isn't a way to say that doesn't sound inadequate. You don't have to apologize to me, I said. You weren't talking to me. You were talking about people like me, which is a different thing, and a more honest thing to examine, if you're willing to. She looked down at the coffee cup. My father would have liked you, she said quietly. He always said the road teaches you things that boardrooms can't. Your father sounds like he knew something true. The tow truck pulled in ahead of her car, and the driver climbed out with the particular brisk competence of someone used to 2 a.m. calls in the fog. I helped Patricia down from the cab. She stood for a moment on the gravel shoulder, looking at my truck, then at her own car being assessed by the tow operator, then at me. Thank you for stopping, she said. I mean that as completely as I know how. It's just what you do out here, I said. The road doesn't care who you were at a wedding. Out here, everybody's just trying to get where they're going. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away somewhere it would actually stay. I climbed back into my cab once the tow truck had her car secured, and she was settled in the tow operator's passenger seat. I had a delivery window to make in Cheyenne, and the fog wasn't going to wait for either of us to finish feeling something about the last half hour. I drove the rest of that night the way I drive most nights. Alone. Alert. The white lines sliding under the headlights. The radio off. My thoughts doing what thoughts do at 3 in the morning on an empty highway. I thought about Patricia Holloway's father and his 30 years on a bread route. I thought about how some people spend their whole lives trying to outrun the very thing that raised them, only to find themselves standing on a foggy shoulder at 2 in the morning, face to face with exactly what they'd been running from. Except this time, it had stopped to help. I don't know if Patricia Holloway changed in any lasting way after that night. I don't know if the next wedding she attends, she'll think twice before saying something careless about someone's job. I'd like to think she will. But I've learned, after 19 years and 2 million miles, that you don't get to know how a story ends for the other person. You only get to know what you did with your own half of it. I stopped. I helped. I told her the truth when the moment called for it, and I didn't make her smaller than she needed to feel to learn something true. That's the only part of the story that was ever mine to write. If you've ever had someone look past you because of what you do for a living, leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you know someone who drives through the night so the rest of the world can wake up to full shelves and running deliveries, tell them they're seen. They deserve to hear it. See you in the next one!